If you think that work in and of itself is highly valuable, you are stupid. Work in and of itself is just work. What matters is outputs, not inputs.
Yeah.
What matters is the results.
Hey everyone, how you doing? Seth Williams here with Jaron Barnes. Welcome to the REtipster podcast. This is episode number 33. I wanted to let you guys know about a new thing that we're going to be doing on the next month or so. This is something I've never done before. It's kind of an experiment, and we're going to see how it goes. Starting in February, what we're going to be doing is a few select mastermind groups with both myself and Jaron and 4 other people in each group. The way this is going to work is we're going to have an application. If you want to apply to be in this mastermind group, go to retipster.com/mastermind. We're going to have a number of questions there. We're not going to be accepting everybody. There's going to be a maximum of 16 slots available for this. And you basically have to answer reasonably right to a lot of the questions that we ask in order just to make sure that you're a good fit for this kind of group and the kind of direction we're going to take it. Because we want to make sure that everybody we put in a group together gets the most out of it. This will be a paid mastermind thing, so just be aware of that. We won't even get into those details until you apply and let us know that you're interested. But yeah, really the idea here is just to create better community and to kind of help people, like hold them by the hand, get to the next level. We'll share our ideas with them and really just to make sure that everybody is growing together. Jaron, is there anything you want to add to this?
I'll share my heart behind where kind of the whole mastermind group idea came from. I've been in a couple of different mastermind groups that have been kind of hit or miss. And a lot of the reason why they was because honestly, people just didn't take it as seriously as I did. And they were also paid. It wasn't like they were just free. But what the heart behind this one is if you guys really want to take your land business to the next level and have an accountability group that you can brainstorm with, that you can struggle through with, that you can bounce ideas off. This is going to be, your group that for the 3 months you guys can do life together and wrestle through and actually be super intentional. So just know that if you apply, there will definitely be some accountability involved. We're actually going to be setting goals and being like, yo, buddy, you said you set this goal, so you're supposed to have this done. Why don't you have it done? So that we actually move the needle forwards in our business, because that's the point of a mastermind, is both to have a collective genius, a collective mind to attack big issues in your life and in your business, as well as to have accountability. So, and
it should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. All the stuff we discuss in these mastermind groups is totally confidential. So, I mean, if you've got an issue in your business that like you really want to share with somebody and get feedback on it, but you just don't know who you can talk to about it, or you don't know who you can talk to that's actually working in the same business and land, this is an opportunity to do that. And it's also the kind of thing where, like Jaron was just saying, we're all going to take this very seriously. So, like, you need to show up to these things. And if you don't show up, you're out of the group. So just be aware of that too. Like, don't do this if you're not sure if you can actually make it or if you don't have the time. In terms of the schedule, part of the reason we're doing, a few different groups and not just one huge group altogether, it's actually going to take be a lot more time consuming for Jaron and I. But the reason we're doing it that way is to make sure that we can kind of hit a few different time slots throughout the day and throughout the week. So say if you're only available in the evenings, hopefully there will be a spot that we can fit you in there. And if you're only available at noon, hopefully we can fit you in there. So that's kind of the logic behind why we're doing it that way as well. But yeah, we're hoping to share a lot of helpful resources and ideas with you guys just from what we know in the land business. And hopefully you'll be able to bring something to the table for all of us to learn from as well. Yeah, with that, the guest that we've got on the podcast today is a guy named Perry Marshall. And if you have any experience in online marketing or just like marketing in general, there's a good chance you've heard Perry's name or maybe you even know him very well. He's written a lot of very, very popular and like profoundly meaningful and helpful books all about marketing. Probably one of the most well-known books is the 80-20 principle for sales and marketing. But really, Perry, we want to talk to him. He's not like a real estate investor per se, but he has a lot to say about the 80-20 principle, how you can use it to spend your time doing the things that have the biggest impact and spend less of your time doing the things that don't matter. There is a ton to be said about that. Totally check out the book if you haven't seen that. We'll link to it in the show notes for this episode at REtipster.com/33. Just the number 33. And you can see links to that book and all the other stuff he's written. But there's a ton to talk about. We could probably go on for like 10 hours, but we're going to condense as much as we can into this 1 hour. So with that said, we're going to jump in an interview now, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So Perry, welcome. How are you doing today?
Great to be here. Thanks for that introduction. And we're going to tell some great stories today and talk about how the world really works. So I appreciate both of you guys. So looking forward to it.
It was funny. I was just talking to kind of this Facebook guy that we've been working with the last couple months. And we were talking about different courses that were out there. And he said that in reality, life, in his studies, he dropped $10,000 on a course recently, but there was really only one nugget that made it worth $10,000. But that one thing out of hours and hours of video and material to go through was the one thing that made it completely worth it. I mean, he made 10x on his return there. And that kind of discrepancy in the universe of there are only really small leverage points that actually matter, that actually get results, is what the 80-20 principle is all about, man. And like ever since I started reading your material, my entire life has completely changed. So I want to kick this thing off with going into your Amway days. Take us back to when you first got started in kind of business. You were in an MLM, you were working as an electrical engineer, got let go, and then you worked for an MLM for 6 years. So you weren't just there, you tried it out and like, oh, that doesn't work. You got grit in you. You like really stuck it through. And yeah, so dive into all that with us.
Well, I had this awakening when I was about 21 years old, maybe. And I worked at this company called W.W. Granger, not an engineer. I was in engineering school at that time. I was just working in the warehouse, and probably a lot of people know what Granger is, big wholesale company. And boss was gone one day, and me and this other guy, we cooked up a little prank. We were in Lincoln, Nebraska, and just up the road in Omaha was another branch, and we would always joke around with the people at the Omaha branch. And so we decided to play a prank, and we typed up a memo. And the memo was from the CEO of Granger to all branch managers, and it said, "Dear branch managers, we regret to inform you that Granger stock has plummeted from $63 a share down to $17 a share, and we will be closing all branches effective Friday. We wish to thank you for your many years of hard work and dedication, and we will make every effort to meet payroll for the current week." And we put it in the fax machine, and we faxed it to Omaha. And then we waited for the people to call us up and go, "Ha ha, very funny." And we waited, and we waited.
What?
And we waited, and nothing happened. And finally, after about an hour, it's like, dang, Tony, I think we should probably call them and see if they got it, because this seems off. And so Tony calls him up, and they go, "Oh, that was you? Oh, well, Brenda pulled that off the fax machine, and she went into hysterics, and she started calling all her family members, and I lost my job after 12 years. I don't know what I'm going to do." And so we didn't really know what to think about that. So we faxed it to Des Moines, and they didn't really know what to think about that. So they faxed it to Sioux City, Iowa, and they didn't really know what to think about that. So they faxed it to Fort Smith, Arkansas.
Oh, no.
Wow.
This was 1990. It was, in hindsight, it was my first experience with electronic viral marketing. But when my boss came back the next day, we're like, we probably need to tell John about this, because if he hears about it from somebody else, we'll probably get in trouble. And so we told my boss about it, and he thought it was sort of funny, but then he calls his manager, and then that guy calls his manager, and the higher up it got, the less funny it got. And well, the fax itself actually wound its way all the way to the CEO of the company, which allegedly, had written it. Would you like to guess what happened to me and Tony?
You got a promotion. They're like, we love your sense of humor.
Yeah. Yeah, we got a promotion to the unemployment line is what we got. And the most fun part of the whole thing was I had been married for a year. And the fun part was calling my father-in-law, Ron, who's a farmer, and saying, "Hey, Ron, you're not going to believe what happened at work this week." He was obviously very happy at that point that his daughter had married me. So that was all, really funny and everything. But of course, I had to go scramble and find a job. I was taking summer school. Summer school classes go really fast. With all of the distractions and the stress of that, I started falling behind in the class, and I ended up dropping the class because I started failing the class. And up to that point, I had defined success is not getting fired from a job and not flunking a class. And if I can manage to avoid both of those things, then I figure I'm successful. And I had now been notoriously unsuccessful 2 times in a row. Then not only that, I took another job. I got fired from that job. I took another job. I got fired from that job. And I won't go into it, but both of those jobs, I basically got fired for asking too many questions and questioning how they were doing things and stuff like that. And so by the end of this summer, this was like the most awful summer. My morale was really dinged up quite a bit. And that was when my friend showed me Amway. Okay. And so I would have never given a second thought to something like that before then, but now they're talking to me about owning your own business. They're talking to me about, hey, you're going to get out of college and you're going to work the 40-year plan, and you're going to not have anything to show for it when it's all done. And so you need to think about different ways. So about maybe 4 months later, I actually signed up, and I plunged myself into the world of face-to-face selling and multi-level marketing and recruiting people and all that. And I was scared to death, but I had already had some hard knocks even at age 21. And so I gathered my courage together and I started making phone calls. I started doing meetings and all that. And I quickly found out that most of my friends who were still living at home, they were not old enough or mature enough to think about doing anything like this. It was like way over their head. And I soon figured out, no, the real people you need to be talking to are your friends' parents, which was more than a little bit intimidating. But yeah, that's how I got started as an entrepreneur.
At this point in Amway's history, I'm actually, I'm in Grand Rapids, Perry, where Amway is headquartered in Ada, Michigan. Amway's actually it's a huge deal in the respect that the DeVosses and the Van Annals are like super wealthy and generous people. So they've just sunk millions and millions and millions of dollars into the community, which is awesome. But we're all also very familiar with Amway, and walking through Meijer or Walmart, and Peterson comes up and just starts talking to me like I'm their best friend. So anyway,
I learned how to do that.
Did that ever work?
I did a lot of that.
Does it work?
Well, yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, if you get good at it, I mean, it takes a while, but it's like this whole art of like looking really casual and just sort of striking up a conversation. But yeah, I did a lot of that, especially because about a year or 2 after I got in Amway, moved to Chicago where I didn't know anybody. So I had to do that. Yeah. I spent just dreadful amounts of time going out and doing stuff exactly like that with all of the unnaturalness that you talk about. But I guess what I have to say is, in the process of doing that, I did learn some very valuable communication skills that eventually did pay off later. I learned storytelling, listening to all those tapes and going to all those seminars and everything. So, it wasn't a worthless endeavor, but it was a giant detour, because the fact is that's not even a real business. You don't even own anything. You're a representative of a big giant company. You don't have title to anything. You're just an independent contractor, okay? Being a 1099 for a big company is not the same as owning your own business. If you doubt when I say that you don't own a business, just try advertising anything and seeing if they'll let you do it. Wow, it was a big giant detour, but I learned a lot, and I made sure that I learned everything I was supposed to learn from that experience.
I'm just gonna say that's a really common thing I've heard from a lot of people who did Amway at one point and they don't do it anymore, was that like they actually got a lot out of it in terms of like personal development and learning sales and communication and that kind of thing. It wasn't necessarily like the task itself of Amway that did so much for them, but sort of the skills they got from that. So there's something to be said for that.
Well, I know that in previous conversations that we've had, obviously off the podcast, that you were kind of, how I took it, kind of at your wit's end on the hamster wheel, grinding it out. And then you kind of had the wool that was pulled over your eyes lifted, and the veil was lifted. And then you're like, wait a minute, I've been shammed the last 6 years, but I got to figure out how they did it. 'Cause I'm a smart dude and I don't get shammed, and I've been shammed. And then you kind of held on there for another 6 months to learn all their tactics. And that's kind of what led you into being a direct marketing guy, right?
So a couple of websites started coming out where it was like, hey, so here's what's really going on here. Somebody got really angry or offended or something with some Amway experience. They decided to put up a site. It was kind of like a big, gigantic blog before blogs existed. And it just became humongous. And there was all stories. And I would read through all this, and I could tell pound for pound, most of the content was just sour grapes. But I could also tell they were telling you stuff that the leadership didn't really want you to know. And then there was another guy who quit the business. He'd been an Emerald, and he put up a website, and he explained all of this stuff. And I kind of had this rose-colored glasses shattering moment. And I messaged my upline Diamond, which I did not often do. And I said, hey, what's up with this? And he immediately replied with, well, here's my office number. Call me and we'll talk about it. Now, your upline Diamond never invites you to call him on the phone. So I call him and I start asking him about this stuff. And I could tell from his tone of voice that he was scared. And I had never experienced this guy this way. This guy was always bulletproof. He's always walking on imported air. And he was fairly forthright. He didn't really try to hide anything. And I remember at one point I said, okay, so you really don't own a business at all. You're an independent contractor for Dexter Yeager and for, who's the biggest distributor. He sold all the tapes and everything, and for Amway. But you don't actually have legal title to anything. And he goes, you could say that. And it was like, wow. And it really was like giving my head a shake. But I was not able to just let go. I was so emotionally wrapped up in all this. And just what I had to do, I had to detangle myself. I had to unwind the thing. I probably spent another 6 months pinging back and forth between the tapes, the seminars, the conversations, the inside of the business stuff, and started clicking into place. Oh, so that's what they really mean when they say this. Oh, that's what they really mean when they say that. And I was constructing a picture of what this whole thing looks like behind the curtain because I've only been on one side of the curtain. And I had to connect the dots between what you saw in front of the curtain and what was behind.
Oh, man. Now, 80-20. I want to talk about the 80-20 principle for a little bit. A lot of people out there are probably familiar with the principle in general, but for those who don't, what's the easiest way to define this, and why have you found it so impactful?
First of all, most people don't really know what it is, even though it's just about the most important thing you could ever know. And secondly, most people who know what it is still don't know what it is. So let me explain. So I remember when I was a sales and marketing manager at a company, I was reading a book. It might have been Jay Abraham. I don't remember, but it said 80% of your sales come from 20% of your customers, and 20% of your sales come from 80% of your customers. And I thought, wow, is that true? And I printed out a sales report, and I went through the thing with a calculator, and I was like, I'll be darned, that's actually correct. But then I didn't really think much more about it. I just thought it was a little rule of thumb that somebody came up with for business or something. A few years later, I read Richard Koch's book, and he made this almost throwaway comment. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. 80-20 is because of chaos theory. And I knew about chaos theory. Chaos theory is this whole field of science that's like, how do earthquakes work, and how do avalanches work, and why do rivers flow the way that they flow, and when a glass shatters, why the crack, grow, like all these things like that. And basically chaos theory is patterns within patterns within patterns. It's the butterfly effect, which says that certain things are really completely unpredictable, but they still have these certain patterns. And I connected the dots. I'm like, oh my word. Well, that means a bunch of things. It was like this giant, my head set on fire in the space of 10 seconds. And all of a sudden I connected all these dots. I'm like, okay, well, what that means is this doesn't just apply to like sales reports and stuff, or just wealth and real estate. It's like everything. It's everywhere, absolutely everywhere. Like, look out your window. There's 10, 80, 20 things going on right outside your window right now. Furthermore, there's an 80-20 inside every 80-20. So there's another one, it's another one, and another one. It's a pattern inside a pattern inside a pattern. So if you start realizing there's an 80-20 inside every 80-20, it means, okay, not only do 20% of your customers produce 80% of your sales, 4% of your customers produce 2/3 of your sales, and 1% of your customers produce half of your sales. And it's not just sales and customers, and it's not just wealth and real estate. It's the electricity that flows in the wires in your house, and it's the traffic on the roads, and it's the size of craters on the moon. It's just absolutely everywhere. And so there's huge inequalities. Everything is unequal, and you can't make it equal. All you can do is harness the inequalities in your favor. And so this is a complete mind shift from what most people think and what most people do. And everything in sales and marketing that actually works because of 80-20. So it becomes the simplest way to understand how you run a business.
This is something that radically changed my life personally, Perry. After reading 80-20 sales and marketing, I used to be under the hat of the 10X rule. And I don't mean to call out Grant Cardone. I have loads of respect for Grant Cardone, but this is just my personal story and what I was dealing with underneath the guise of the 10X rule in my life versus 80-20. So for years, I've been living under this ongoing pressure of like, if I want to be successful, I just have to do more. If I want to increase my results, I just increase my effort. And if I push, then that's what's going to make me successful. And after reading your book, I was actually having a conversation with a friend, and I had this epiphany. And I said, wait a minute, if 80-20 is true, then the 10X rule is massively wasteful. It's like if I'm lighting a candle, I don't bring a blowtorch, because if I bring a blowtorch, I'll burn the entire candle. I bring a lighter. And now at the same time, I don't rub two sticks together because that's massively inefficient, but I find the right amount of pressure, the right amount of thing to move the needle the most to get the result that I want. And then it completely was this massive paradigm shift for me, because I realized all of a sudden, wait a minute, hard work there are tons and tons and tons of hardworking people out there that never become truly successful in the way that I define it. Maybe for where they're at in their life, that they've reached a certain level of life, that's great. But for the way I define success, my sister-in-law is an incredible worker. She literally has scars on her arms because she studied for so long to get into college back in Kazakhstan, that she was so cold that she wrapped herself around the furnace and she fell asleep because out of exhaustion and burned her arm. People don't understand immigrant work ethic. People work really hard, but there's a massive difference between somebody who is a hard worker and somebody who's a millionaire. I'm not saying my sister-in-law may never be a millionaire because she's, connected to me, and maybe in some sense in her world, I'm her 80-20, but if she didn't have exposure to a lot of the business stuff that I have exposure to and the real estate stuff, it's most likely that her life would end up mediocre at best. Even though she's a massively hard worker. She's amazing, and I'm not speaking ill of her, but I just want to illustrate that there are a lot of real estate investors out there, a lot of people in our audience that put on this 10X hat that I'm just going to push until it works, and if it breaks me in the process and breaks my relationships, it doesn't matter. So, I want to bring this kind of to a conversation that I've been having a lot with people recently on the blog post about the 10X rule, with the 80-20 principle. To some degree, work ethic has to come into the equation. At least that's my assumption. That's going to be the argument that I make. And I want to hear from you, because I've recently read on Richard Koch's blog that he had an entire post literally saying the Protestant work ethic is absolutely wasteful and stupid. So what's your take on it? Because you know hard work better than most. I know your schedule. You're busy, right?
Yeah, I work pretty hard. So I had a very similar version to your whole 10X thing when I was exactly your age. And it was, I think I even had a little piece of paper up on my desk, and it said, massive action solves every problem. And I learned it in MLM. Okay. Now, that is how MLM is. And in MLM, they give you a track to run on. They say, here, you do these 8 steps, you do these things, and do not stop, do not look up, do not think, do not reconsider until you're a direct distributor or you're a diamond or something. They'll just duplication, and they just pound it in your head. Okay. And there is no creativity, not really, in that business. And besides, that business doesn't really even work very well anyway. It's one of the worst industries you could ever be in. And I speak as a person who's consulted in 300 industries. It's literally just about the worst. But in any case, you need to realize that the world has completely changed twice in the last 100 years. Okay. First off, there's the Industrial Revolution with the automobiles and electricity and all that modern stuff. Okay. But then on top of that, there's the internet. The more technological sophistication you have in a society, the more levers you have. If you go back to 1500, where everybody is just plowing behind a donkey, then doggone well, yeah, you better work. If you're a hunter-gatherer, then you better work, because that's all you can do. But the more tools you have, and the more technology there is, and the more sophistication there is, a whole bunch of things start changing. First of all, it becomes less and less and less about your physical labor. Why? Because robots can do jobs, and because workers can do jobs in Vietnam for 65 cents an hour, and, all of that. And so brawn and muscle and pure effort become less and less important, and ingenuity and creativity become more and more and more important. And so the Protestant work ethic basically says, look, the most virtuous thing that you could possibly do is just work, right? Because it contributes and it's positive and all of that, okay? And it leads you to believe, well, as long as I'm working really hard, I'm not a bad guy. Like, working makes you a good guy. Well, in the 21st century, what functionally, practically makes you a good guy or a good gal is ingenuity and relationships and innovation and doing things that robots and AIs can't do and doing things that factory workers in Vietnam can't do. And what Richard was talking about in his blog post, he said this, and I agree with it. He said, I do not know anybody who can be at peak productivity more than 25 to absolute at the most 30 hours a week. And most people are like 15 hours a week of like really quality output. Okay. And the rest is declining levels of quality. Okay. Now, if you're just plowing behind a horse in a field, it doesn't really matter whether you're mentally sharp or not. Okay. As long as you can hold the plow in your hands and, then that's going to work and it's going to produce more. But in a society of knowledge workers where problems are solved by ingenuity, it's literally 5% of your time produces 2/3 of your output. And so you need to start being really, really smart about what's working and what's not working. So when they were sitting there telling me that massive action solves every problem, I wasn't accomplishing anything. In fact, they were making money whether I succeeded or not, despite what they told me. Why? Because I was buying tapes. And if I was buying tapes, they were making a profit. So basically, it's like, just keep these people buying tapes and tell them if they work hard enough, they'll eventually succeed. Well, there you go. That's the whole business. Just keep people hopeful as long as you possibly can, and they'll buy tapes and you'll make money and they'll lose money. Well, that's a crappy deal. Frankly, it's racketeering is what it is. And so, massive action does not solve every problem. Ingenuity solves most problems, and massive action doesn't really solve much of anything unless you're doing the right thing. I mean, there's a whole tectonic shift that's going on in the world right now. And with AI and all that stuff, it's just accelerated.
So my question, in light of the 80-20 principle, where does hard work come in? Because I'm here in Kansas right now visiting a friend, and I had a conversation with him about the 80-20 principle. And he said, it sounds great, but the truth is a lot of lazy people that do the whole 4-hour work week thing and I'm going to just have my computer on a beach drinking a martini, but actually don't ever have a viable business that takes off the ground. Like Richard Koch in his material straight up says, lazy plus smart is the optimal position you can be as a business owner. So I just am still struggling with because I know for all of our majority of our audience right now, their mind was just completely racked. Like they just went wait a minute, I've been living under a lie. What is this 80-20 thing? What do I do with this? So is there a place for hard work? Because I know Tim Ferriss, being in the Bay Area, I used to work for a place called 99 Designs. Well, I almost started working there, and I was talking to somebody who did a lot of work with Tim Ferriss, and she's like, for how much he says he doesn't work or works a 4-hour work week, the dude at the time was working 18-hour days. So obviously that's completely anecdotal. I don't know Tim Ferriss from anybody, but I'm assuming the guy works a lot. I know you work a lot. I know Brandon Turner, who also is a huge fan of yours over at Bigger Pockets. I know he used to work a lot. He's starting to work less and less and less now. But back in the day when I worked there, that guy worked like an animal. And I've worked like an animal to get to where I'm at. So is it truly that hard work there's no place for it whatsoever, and the more you could optimize, the better off you're going to be? Would you suggest for most entrepreneurs to force themselves to only work 25 hours a week? Or is there a place where you identify leverage points and then put massive action in there? Where does work ethic actually fit into the equation?
First of all, I think, in fact, I don't just think, I am absolutely convinced that if you work 7 days a week, you are making a mistake. you are making a big mistake. You should take off a day every week. Call it Sabbath, call it Sunday, whatever. You should do that. I worked 7 days a week for a really long time. And what I ended up doing was burning out my marriage, burning out my relationships, burning myself out. You will be more productive in the 6 days that you work than you will working an extra seventh, because rest is very important and relationships are very important. Now, you can still work hard the rest of the time, but I think there's only a couple of circumstances where you should work 18 hours a day. One is what Dan Kennedy likes to call the phenomenon. And the phenomenon is the 18 months that propels you farther than the previous 18 years. A lot of people experience this like when their career takes off or when their business takes off. Like you start a company and you really struggle for a while, and then all of a sudden you hit a groove and it's actually working, right? And like deals are flying at you left and right, and everything's great. And it's like this magic carpet ride. Like, okay, then you hustle your buns and you go as fast as you can. Okay, so like here's an example of somebody that's in the phenomenon right now is Jordan Peterson. Okay, nobody knew who he was 2 years ago, and now everybody knows who he is. Okay, Jordan should like do as many speaking tours and all that kind of stuff within sane limits. Like he can't kill himself. Okay, he cannot kill himself, but within reasonable limits, he should go speak as many times as he can, do as many interviews as he can. It's okay. I agree with that because that gets him out there, right? He can ride on that because that fame is probably going to decline to some degree at some point. But then after he's no longer the hit, movie star person, he'll still have a following for many years after that, okay? It would make total sense that guy would work 14 or 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Not 7, even in the phenomenon. And look, if you're an immigrant washing dishes at minimum wage and it's the only way you can feed your family, then work 2 jobs and feed your family. But look, either what you're doing is working or it's not. And if it's not working, then your effort should be finding something that works. And if something works, then you should find the 20% of it that works the best. But there's always this other part that's diminishing returns, and you need to just stop, okay? Because it's not getting you ahead. So with work, there's always this point of diminishing returns where you're doing more and more things that are lower and lower value. And so if you think that work in and of itself is highly valuable, you are stupid. Work in and of itself is just work. What matters is outputs, not inputs. The Protestant work ethic values inputs over outputs. That's backwards. Yeah. What matters is the results.
I just have a hypothetical question here because everything you're saying makes sense. Let's say though, like if I'm in the rental property business and I own 2 rental properties, and my goal is to only own rental properties that make the most and get rid of the ones that make the least. But if I only have 2 rental properties, there's just not enough data there. Like maybe they're both terrible, maybe they're both awesome, maybe, I don't know. So in that situation, I don't really have enough information to even make an educated decision yet, right? I have to just get more rentals or analyze more situations out there and figure out where I sit in that spectrum. And then at that point, I can make a decision. Or what would you do with a lack of data like that?
Okay, so there's a situation that is universal to anybody who is, let's just categorize it as unhappy with current situation, okay? All right, I got these odd jobs, or I got these little properties, or I got these things, but I'm barely getting by. Well, you have to get by however you can get by, but you have to understand something. Your number one job when whatever you're doing is barely working Your number one job is to figure out something that will work. The worst thing you can do is keep doing something that barely works in vain hopes that it will somehow magically start working better. Like, you have to question maybe everything. Question your assumptions. Is this the right property? Am I charging the right amount of rent? Should I be in some other completely different property? Should I be in this business? How many people can I go have coffee with and get a perspective on my situation until I do figure out how to get ahead? Like, you spend your time exploring your options. You don't spend your time just turning the crank, turning the crank, turning the crank. The irony of my Amway experience was they would say on stage, the epitome of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And they would say that, and they were talking about the 40-year career plan, 9 to 5. The irony was, it was true of Amway too. Okay, I've showed the plan to 250 people, and I have still not gotten anywhere with this thing. And guess what? The definition of an insanity is doing the same thing, right? And then they're kind of shaming me into not quitting because winners never quit and quitters never win. Oh, that's a pile of BS. Winners quit all kinds of things. They quit things that don't work as soon as they figure out that they don't work. Gary Halbert and many of my mentors, frankly, they would say, fail fast. That's really what you're supposed to do in a business. As fast as you can, figure out that something is not going to work, eliminate it, stop doing it, and next. But if you're struggling and you're scrambling around, you're trying to figure out, how many people can you buy them a cup of coffee and talk to them and get input and connections and introductions and ideas and perspective and wisdom? How many people could you take out for coffee and just say, hey, can I pick your brain? You know, I know you're a lot more successful than me. There's an awful lot of people that would take that invitation. If you had 3 of those conversations every week, you're washing dishes, or you got these lousy properties, how could you not eventually figure out a way out of that? Mm-hmm. Maybe one of them will hire you, or maybe, but good grief, like, don't just sit there and pound that same thing. Oh my word. Mm-hmm. The stupidity, the utter stupidity of what I was doing for like 5 years is just, wow. Yeah.
Real quick, I just want to say thanks for that, Perry, because I think that if people are paying attention, that really has the power to change their life. So,
assuming somebody does have the data, like, let's say I've figured out the 50 things I do every single week, and I've sort of quantified a value to every single activity, and I've sort of figured out which things fall above the 20% line and which ones fall below it in terms of the value they bring to the table. What then? Like, do I just start saying, okay, I'm going to quit this thing, or I'm going to outsource this thing? Like, how do you decide what to do with those things that aren't that impactful?
Let's just be really clear about this. The 20% that's effective is 16 times more valuable than the 80% that's not. 16, okay? And the most effective 4% is 64 times as effective as the other 80%, okay? If you have 50 things that you do, I guarantee that you can take 10 and 40, and the 10 is 16 times more valuable than the other 40. So the question you have to ask yourself is, how do I put more juice into the 10, and how do I get rid of part of the other 40? Mm-hmm. Which almost always means delegating, okay? So the most simple way to delegate is somebody mows your lawn, somebody else washes your clothes, somebody else cooks you dinner, somebody else hangs pictures on the wall or does the honeydew projects, somebody else takes your car to the mechanic, somebody else goes to the office supply store. There's $10 an hour work, there's $100 an hour work, there's $1,000 an hour work, there's $10,000 an hour work. So out of your 50 things, probably 3 to 5 of them are actually $1,000 an hour work. How do you get rid of 25 things, which are pretty trivial, and do the 3 things that make you $1,000 an hour, even if it's only $1,000 an hour for 15 minutes, because they exist. There's a whole chapter in 80/20 sales and marketing. It talks about that. You focus on that and you delegate stuff, and then you make space for sanity. This is how you get one day off. This is how you get a few evenings off. And then what happens is if you work all the time, you don't have any creative juice left. And then the innovations don't come, and the inventions don't come, and the brilliant insight that comes to you in the shower in the morning, it's a lot easier for that to come if you actually got a good sleep last night. If you're only sleeping 4 hours a night because you're burning the candle at both ends, you're in a downward spiral. Like, wake up. Not the way you want to live your life.
That's why I'm starting to do things like even coming to Kansas here. Like, I worked a full work week. I'm able to work remote, which is awesome. But the fact that I used to live with this friend of mine, his name is Pete Cabrera, and he's a really good friend of mine. I used to live with him when I was like 19, 20 years old. I actually met my wife through him. And for the last probably 6 years, I really haven't been intentional about my relationship or coming around, because I in my mind, I've been sacrificing for the infamous someday that may not ever happen. It could happen, and the journey is worth being on the journey. But my biggest takeaway from a lot of the things that I've learned from your material, man, is that while you're on the journey, you have to have soul feeding activities that just recharge your batteries. And just being around him, laughing and cutting up, like, it feeds my soul. Listening to music feeds my soul. Going on a run and working out and going for a walk with my wife, it feeds my soul. And it actually, even though it's not a direct, urgent, like, ROI right now, it feeds my soul to where I'm actually able to be the most productive that I can be when I'm on. So I just thank you so much for that, because you're so productive, Perry. Like, you're super optimized, but you're also a direct marketer. So you of following, having people subscribe to an email list and having these influencers talk to your life. I'm just curious for you, because you hang out with Dan Kennedy, just so if people don't know who Perry is, the guy, I've seen products where he's done like collabs with Gary Vaynerchuk and all these super high level people. So this dude's legit. So who do you follow? Like, if I were to go into your email right now, what lists are you subscribed to? Who are the influencers and the blogs, if they're blogs or YouTube channels, who do you subscribe to?
Aside from REtipster.com, basically.
Obviously, because that's number one, right?
Well, I'm going to throw you a curveball, and I'm going to tell you that my real number one influence is ancient writers. I don't actually pay that much attention to the rest of the marketing world and all that. But here's an example. I got a book here called Seneca, Letters from a Stoic. Seneca was one of the most wealthy and influential people in the history of the Roman Empire. He's a genius philosopher, and he's a really good guy. This is actually a very interesting book. And I have the saying, everybody should read something written before Gutenberg every day. This is the antidote to the shallowness of social media. If something survived from before the printing press, it means that scribes wrote it down and copied it and hid it in urns, and it survived the sacking of Rome and the burning of Alexandria and all that kind of stuff. It means it's really, 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 really good stuff. And that is actually the antidote to a lot of this. These guys will tell you that hard work is important, but they won't tell you to work 7 days a week. They'll tell you to take a day off and tell you a lot of other wise stuff too. If you focus on that kind of wisdom, in fact, if you go to perrymarshall.com and search Gutenberg, you'll find a blog post where I got a whole huge list of pre-Gutenberg reading. Pick any of that. Find something you like. You're not going to like all of it, but find something in there that you could like. It could be the Bible. It could be Rumi. It could be Seneca. It could be Plato. I don't really care. And you will have an edge that 99.9% of your generation, whatever Generation X, baby boomer, Gen Y, millennial, pays no attention to, okay? you'll have a secret advantage, because there's this old saying, I think G.K. Chesterton said this: news is old things happening to new people. If you know what's already been going on in the world for the last 4,000 years, nothing's really going to surprise you. And we really need that with all the surprises of the 21st century. Like, if you're really grounded, the surprises won't be surprises. They'll just be new versions of the same old things. So anyway, so that's my advice.
Yeah. Yeah. I was actually reading through Ecclesiastes a few months ago, and I think it actually said like almost that exact thing. Like, nothing new happens anymore. Like, the same stuff just happens over and over and over again throughout world history.
And people, some people they'll criticize it and they'll say, hey, they didn't have iPhones, they didn't have TVs. Well, that's not what he means. You have to go a level deeper to understand what he's really saying. He's really saying there's no new human conditions. Mm-hmm. There's no new frustrations in life. They're all the same old ones. So anyway, that's really some of the best advice I could possibly give. And when you focus on things, your best advice for a constantly changing 21st century: become super aware of the things that aren't going to change. And then you'll have the bandwidth to deal with the ones that do. Mm-hmm. And 80-20 is not going to change. Yeah. And the good advice in Seneca, not going to change.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Perry, hey man, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I know you're a huge deal, and it's an honor that we could have you on the show. If people want to learn more about you, should they go to your website, or what's the best way to learn more?
The best thing you could do, go to perrymarshall.com, and there's an email series called the 30-Day Street MBA. Sign up for that, and it'll give you an education. It'll educate you about 80-20, and watch what happens. Like, pay attention. You'll learn just from the marketing that is done to you, and that's always a good way to learn.
And I just want to chime in there, guys, that I fully recommend anything from Perry, because I've been exposed to quite a bit in my young career as a striving, aspiring real estate entrepreneur, and there's hands down been nothing more valuable than his material. So definitely encourage you guys to check him out.
Yeah, that's quite the ringing endorsement.
Hey, thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot, Perry.